Welcome back to PHIL 2103, Introduction to Philosophy and Ethics. Now, in this set of lectures, we're going to be talking about free will. Free will is an amazingly mind-boggling process to think about, but it is a key part of philosophy, because philosophy asks us, are we truly free? So, for example, in class, whenever I have this lecture, I will tend to use an example. Well, I bring in a set of dominoes. These are my poorly drawn dominoes right here. And I will lay down a piece of masking tape or a piece of clear tape on a table. I'll set a string of dominoes with a little bit of room at the end here, and I will say this. I will say, you can take this domino and you are free to place it anywhere on this line. And the goal is to see if I can knock over these dominoes without knocking over the one you've placed. Now, inevitably, whether they place the domino here or clear at the end of the tape, I am able to use enough force to get the dominoes to knock over the other one. I've even had some students think they're creative and clever and place the domino laying face down so that it's already knocked over. But when I knock the dominoes over, inevitably it will crush down upon the other domino. So the question becomes, then, do you truly have free will? Because I gave you the option to place that domino anywhere along a set path, but there was a set path. Think of it this way. When you go to the grocery store, do you have free will to buy anything that you want? Well, the answer is yes and no. You have the free will to choose between the products that are there, but someone else has chosen the products that are going to be in that grocery store. So you don't have complete free will, you have a measure of free will. And so this is what we have to ask. Are we truly free? In this lecture we're going to be talking about compatibilism, but let me give you a few key terms to this free will understanding. The first key term is determinism. Determinism says that the future is fixed by the past. If I knock over this domino, it's going to hit the next domino, which is going to hit the next domino, and that is the way your past plays into your future. Indeterminism, just as it sounds, is the opposite position that says the future is not fixed by the past. Even though there may be some element where your past has had a string of events, your course can always be changed. Compatibilism, which is what we're talking about in this video, says that freedom and determinism can coexist. Even though some choices have been made for you, you are still free within the system. And then incompatibilism, again the opposite, says that freedom and determinism cannot coexist. Let's talk about a few nuanced terms then. Hard determinism says that the future is entirely fixed by the past. There is a one-to-one correlation ratio between this domino hitting this domino, hitting this domino, and exactly what the future is going to look like. Causality, which is similar, says that the past causes the future. But it says that a fully determined future is therefore incompatible with free will. So if these dominoes are going to fall and our life is going to look at a predictable pattern and is going to develop, then that means that we were not truly free along the way. The last is the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason says that anything that happens does so for a definite reason. You've probably used this or heard this at funerals or when other major catastrophes or troubling life events has happened. Someone will say, I know that everything happens for a reason. This is the principle of sufficient reason. So let's talk specifically now about compatibilism. Compatibilism says that a determined future is still compatible with free will. And actions that are causally determined are still free if there are no constraints on the action. Traditional compatibilism teaches that an action is free if the action is caused by the will of the agent. Therefore, you as the agent chose that action, and that action is performed without constraints. A nuanced version of this would be deep self-compatibilism, which says that caused actions can be free, but only when they're produced by authentic desires. That is, you did something, you chose something, but you also wanted to choose that. It wasn't so much that a parent or a government gave you a choice between two things but coerced you into one of them. It was that you freely and willfully chose that action. Now let's talk about the theology of free will. As before, theology and philosophy interact in powerful ways, and on this question of free will, there's a huge area of overlap. Now, the first understanding that comes into the theology of free will is Calvinism. Calvinism aligns with compatibilist teachings. It says that God's sovereignty determines whatsoever will come to pass in a way that is consistent with compatibilist freedom. It also says that God's election and predestination are not based on a pre-existing foreknowledge, but rather on His sovereign will. And so certain shades of this come into play. What this is saying is that God is sovereign and that He chooses what actions we will ultimately make. The extreme version of this is five-point Calvinism, which holds that God and God alone chooses who goes to heaven and who is passed over and therefore goes to hell. Moderate Calvinists, often called 3 or 4-point Calvinists, do not allow for God to become the author of evil and state that God merely passes over those who are not elected to go to heaven. So in the 5-point Calvinist view, or in the extreme view, God may actively choose who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. In a more moderate Calvinistic view, God, essentially like someone who's picking a team for dodgeball, says, I choose you, I choose you, I choose you, but just doesn't choose the others and essentially kind of ignores them. Now, there are some problems that will come out of this. So let's ask these questions. First of all, can our actions be free if they're determined by our past? If the dominoes are going to fall and life is going to end up a certain way, then do we have any measure of true freedom that comes from this? Second of all, the consequence argument states that determinism is not compatible with moral responsibility. If my life, my actions were already pre-chosen for me, why am I responsible for the results of them? If I could not have chosen another path, why do I have the consequences that I must face? Now, the biggest is a theological problem. See, both double and single predestination, that is, God chooses some and passes over others in single predestination, or double predestination where God chooses who goes to heaven and who goes to hell, may logically lead to some problems. Among them, God becomes the author of evil, or willfully chooses some to go to hell and others go to heaven. And what does this therefore say about the character of God? If a human being was predestined by God to sin, then does that sin come from that fallen nature of that person? Or does it come from God who forced or was sovereign in His actions towards that person? And if that is the case, when it comes to the ultimate question of hell and heaven, if God passes over some, is He not still damning them to hell? And what does this say about the character of God? A God who would choose willfully for some to be forced into hell and others to be accepted into heaven. There's some recommended reading I want to give to you. And this goes for both this and the next video, which is over the Arminian or libertarian position. So the first one is Why I Am Not an Arminian by Robert Peterson. This examines the Calvinist position and says what is the problem with the Arminian side that makes Calvinism the best option. There is a counterpoint to that, Why I Am Not a Calvinist by Joe Donjel, which looks at the Calvinist position and examines its tenets in light of the Arminian position. Another good example would be Christian Theology by Millard J. Erickson. If you've taken systematic theology at Mid-America Christian University, this is one of the background texts that was used in creating that course. And the last is Arminian Theology, Myths and Realities by Roger E. Olson. These recommended readings would be amazing for this study of free will, and specifically the theological aspect of it. Now, let's look at the other side of the free will equation.